I'm Nora. People could catch me drinking coffee. Thank all of you Anchorage Chamber members for joining us today for yet another virtual Make It Monday forum. My name is Bruce Bustamante. I'm the president and CEO of the Anchorage Chamber. And today we're blessed to have a number of experts in critical areas to help make Anchorage a safer place. And so we're going to be hearing from these people a little bit later. There's just a little bit of business I'm going to go over first, but I'll have a chance to do a well-deserved bio and introduction of each one of our panelists today, and we're real excited to have them here to join us. Today is June 1st, the first day that small businesses and some nonprofits can apply for the Alaska CARES grant money, and this is something that opened at 8 o'clock this morning. And so for those people that plan on applying and you haven't done so yet, we encourage you to do so right away. It is on a first come, first served basis. And what I did, I posted in the chat section of our presentation today is just kind of a quick link to get to the Credit Union 1 page for Alaska CARES grant applications. And you'll see there's a number of steps to go through regarding qualifications, documentations needed, and such. So if you folks are in need of more CARES grant funding, please look that site over, and as I mentioned, I made kind of a quick link available to you. Again, we always want to thank our sponsor, and that is Alaska 529. You never know what will spark your child's curiosity, so Alaska 529 can help you prepare. Save in Alaska and study anywhere. I've been through this process of saving for my kids' college education, so you can never start too soon on that. So again, thanks to our sponsors, Alaska 529. A description of today's program will give us an overview of the Anchorage Alliance for Violence Prevention, including its interpersonal violence prevention plan for Anchorage, work group goals for implementation of prevention strategies, and a short teaser of training that can be provided for local businesses about how to respond if clients or employees are dealing with unhealthy or abusive relationships in the workplace. And as I mentioned, just a critically important issue to address for all employers and for everyone really to be aware of. Our speakers today, first is, and I'll go through all of the bios first, is Summer Chitwood, and she's the Prevention and Education Coordinator at Abused Women's Aid in Crisis, or as we know as AWAKE, and serves as a facilitator of the Anchorage Alliance for Violence Prevention. She has a background in education and has worked with survivors of domestic violence for the previous 8 years. So thank you, Summer, for joining us. Also joining us is Lisa Demmer, and she's the communications manager at the Rasmussen Foundation, the biggest private funder in Alaska and a former Anchorage Daily News reporter. An initiative to renovate and expand domestic violence shelters is among the foundation's most significant efforts of the last decade. And yeah, certainly I enjoyed working with Lisa when she was at the Daily News, and we all know the impact the Rasmussen Foundation has made on Alaska and making it a better place. So Lisa, thank you. Our next presenter is Sarah Fechtelkotter. I hope I got that right. She's joined us, originally she was in Minnesota, worked on the Minnesota Department of Commerce before moving to Alaska. And as a judicial law clerk with the Alaska court system, she heard countless stories of domestic violence in criminal and civil cases. Sarah is now an attorney at Alaska Legal Services Corporation, while her work involves protecting victims' rights in criminal matters, representing victims in civil cases, and advocating for victims in administrative proceedings. And Sarah, thank you for joining us today. And then the next presenter would be Samantha McNally, and she's the community outreach educator for Planned Parenthood, where she teaches sex education and healthy relationships lessons at schools throughout the Anchorage community. She's also been the facilitator for the Anchorage Teen Council, a group of local high school students committed to learning about sex and relationships and teaching accurate and inclusive lessons to their peers. For the last 3 years, Samantha has been a women's advocate in the Awake shelter. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to our presenters. Again, thank you so much for all of you for making time to educate our membership today. Summer, you're on mute. There you go.
Yeah, I got it. Thanks. Thanks so much, Bruce. Thanks for the introduction. We'll get started here sharing my screen, and then we'll get started. So minimize my view so I don't see myself. All right, so we're going to talk about creating a safer Anchorage today and how communities and businesses can get involved in preventing intimate partner violence here in Anchorage. So what we're talking about, sorry, my screen. There we go. Okay. So the Anchorage Alliance for Violence Prevention, or AAVP as we like to call it for short, it's a coalition of community agencies and individuals, as I mentioned, working to prevent interpersonal violence across Anchorage. Part of what I mean by interpersonal violence is any type of violence between people that have some kind of relationship. So that could be domestic violence, sexual violence, teen dating violence, child abuse, or stalking. So those are the types of violence that we're talking about. The people that are involved in this coalition are interested in preventing all those different types of violence. And to do that, we've been granted given a grant from the State of Alaska Council on Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault. And part of that grant was to do a community readiness assessment, which I'll be talking about later in the presentation. And then from that assessment, creating a prevention plan with strategies of how to look at areas in our community where there may be gaps in services, and then providing strategies to work to prevent the high rates of violence that we have in our community, and of interpersonal violence specifically that we have in our community. And then work groups would be established after the prevention plan is created, working on those specific goals and working to implement specific strategies. So that's kind of an overview of the coalition. And then I just want to start the next slide with kind of where we're at in Anchorage, why this is such a big deal, why we're talking about this. So in 2015, UAA did a survey for lifetime estimates, specifically for women, about experiencing domestic violence, sexual violence, or both. And as you can see in the red down there, 1 in 48 women experience intimate partner sexual violence or both. And so that's 1 in 2. Nationwide, it's 1 in 4, 1 in 3, depending on which stats you look at. And then also men, this wasn't in the same survey, but men in Anchorage and Alaska, it's 1 in 4. Nationwide, it's 1 in 7. And then we also know that people who identify as LGBTQ+ experience some of the highest rates. I don't have specific numbers, but I do know that they experience higher rates than people who do not identify as LGBTQ. So we have a really high rate of violence in our community, of interpersonal violence specifically in our community. It's some of the highest in the nation, 1 in 2 versus 1 in 4, 1 in 4 versus 1 in 7. So we know that if we're talking about epidemics, like we're talking about COVID-19 as an epidemic, this is an epidemic and it's been going on for a very long time. This was 2015. UAA is doing another survey in 2020. Hopefully it'll show that it's been going down. In 2010, there was another survey done and it was at 60% of women had experienced domestic violence, sexual violence, or both. So it was trending down for 2015. So hopefully we're continuing in that direction, but it's still at an epidemic level, and it's been there for a long time. So that's why we're bringing awareness to this issue, and that's why we care about this issue. It is a public health issue, and we want to try to prevent these high rates of violence, because people shouldn't be experiencing violence in their personal relationships. So talking about COVID-19, people have talked a little bit about how is domestic violence or sexual violence, how are victims experiencing this time? And we don't know exactly. We do know that there's probably higher rates since people are having to hunker down, and they may be hunkering down with someone who's causing them harm in their home. So we're not, again, sure. It's already an underreported statistic, underreported crime. So we don't know for sure, but we do know that in April, Awake saw a 31% increase in their April crisis calls versus April 2019. And there's not really a whole lot else going on besides COVID-19 right now to influence that kind of a jump in calls. So we're assuming that that's mostly because of COVID and people reaching out for help and needing more help, probably maybe because violence is escalating because they're at home or having to be with their partner all the time or with someone who's causing them harm. And then other things that are impacted by COVID-19, shelters are still open, but their numbers are limited. So we can't take as many people because of the social distancing and trying to keep everyone safe while they're in shelter. And then also at the same time, if people are isolated with their abusers, having a harder time getting to the phone and finding a safe way to call. But there are also at the same time new opportunities for help, as mentioned in the article by Kevin Clarkson, Attorney General Kevin Clarkson. He talked about Uber and both ADT and having some new applications. The Department of Law reached out to Uber because Uber had been supplying rides and giving money for survivors down in the lower 48. And so the Department of Law up here was like, we're going to try this out, and reached out to Uber and got $11,000 for survivors of domestic violence, sexual violence, and human trafficking, which is just fantastic work. And we're just really happy that even in the midst of all of the crisis, that there's opportunity still for businesses to help out, to donate things, to be able to supply support for people who are experiencing these types of violence. Also at the same time, very encouraging that our leaders, like Attorney General Clarkson and our governor, are drawing attention to this issue and saying that it is our responsibility to end domestic violence, that it is a community issue. And so that is very encouraging, because we want, as we'll get into later, we want to increase the awareness in our community that this is something that we can all work to prevent. It's not just an individual issue. All right, so getting into that then, the community readiness assessment that I talked about earlier was something that it was part of the grant that we received to determine how ready is our community to prevent interpersonal violence, because we don't want to go above and beyond where they're at, right? We have to meet people where they're at. And so what we did is we did a community readiness survey. It was based on the Tri-Ethnic Center for Prevention Research, and the citation down at the bottom is where you can find more information about that specific framework. And that framework is based, so what we did is the way it works is you reach out to different sectors of the community and you interview people that are well informed about the community that they live in, which is, in this case, is Anchorage, and asking them specific questions about how ready is our community? How ready do you think our community is to prevent interpersonal violence? So it's not asking them how much they as an individual know, it's asking them, how much do you think our community responds? Like when there's for example, when there's something that comes up in the news about domestic violence, or how much do you think our community knows about prevention efforts of interpersonal violence? Things like that. And so it's asking that individual that knows a lot about the community, how do you think our community responds? And so this scale, the scale of how we rate the answers that they gave, is based on a scale of 1 to 9. 1 being, I don't think the community even knows this is an issue, doesn't even think that domestic violence or sexual violence are an issue. To 9 being, we recognize that that interpersonal violence is an issue in our community. We want to hold people accountable, and we want to hold ourselves accountable to work to prevent this violence from happening. So unfortunately, Anchorage scored rather low on the scale at 2.3, which is a level of denial and resistance, which means that either the people that were interviewed believed that our community was at a level of denying that it's really a problem, and then also kind of resistant to the idea that there's anything they really need to do to solve this problem. It's an individual problem. Like, that's happening inside a relationship. It's not my business. So that's kind of where they're at. And on the chart on the right, And I should mention, we talk to people from business sectors, from community nonprofits. We talk to people from the city level, leadership level. We talk to people, just our community members that have been in the community a long time, the faith-based community. So we talk to people from all different sectors to get a broad picture, a broad spectrum of what they believe. And then on the right there, and you see in the chart, there were 6 different areas that the questions fell into in terms of talking about prevention and knowledge. And then those areas were, all the numbers for those ratings were averaged to get the 2.3. So for example, you can see that leadership, that means like the mayor or different leaders in our community, may have a little bit of a higher level of readiness to prevent interpersonal violence. A 3, it designates that they know it's a problem, but they're not sure exactly what to do about it. And this was back in 2018 when we did this survey. So that's what they were rated at by these people that we asked the questions of. And then other efforts, things like community efforts, like what are the community efforts going on? Do you think our community knows what our community is doing to prevent interpersonal violence? Do you think there are any efforts by the community? And then community climate would be, how do people respond when there's domestic violence? Are they taking responsibility? Community knowledge is knowing in like the dynamics of domestic violence and sexual violence. Do they know what it looks like, or are they more based on stereotypical knowledge? Resources, do they know what resources are available to the community? So those are just the 6 different strategies. And so the 6 different areas that were the questions were asked. And then came to the 2.3 and how that informs the prevention plan that we created. I know this is a lot of information. How it informs that prevention plan is knowing that we have to make our strategies and our communication about this at a level of a 2.3. We can't come into the community, into Anchorage, and say, everybody should care about this because it's a community health issue, because that's way above denial and resistance. We have to meet people at a level of being able to raise the awareness. So saying, this is an issue because these are our rates. These are the people that are being affected. This is how many people are calling into the crisis line. This is how, and the kind of raising the awareness that, yes, this is an issue. And then we can get to like the higher levels of like, the reasons you should care about this is because it affects everyone. This isn't just an individual problem. So that's why it helps inform the prevention plan, so we don't create strategies that are way above where our community is ready to do the work. Tasha, are there any questions? I know there's a lot of information, so I don't want to...
No problem. No questions yet, but for those listening, if you do have a question throughout the presentation, go ahead and type it in the Q&A box, and we will, we can either address them all at the end, Summer, or we can do questions in the middle, whatever you guys prefer.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks. All right, so then that gets into our prevention plan. And so from this community readiness assessment, we created a prevention plan. We looked at areas where maybe there were some gaps in area where people may not know as much, or what do we need to do in order to increase that readiness so that we can really reach people where they're at and really help people understand why it's important to prevent interpersonal violence in our community, and that it is a community issue. So goal 1 was to increase our community participation in AAVP specifically. So if our coalition can look more like our community and have more diversity and have more partnerships, have ways for people to connect with us like Facebook and a website and things like that, then people start to recognize that there are efforts being put in place to prevent interpersonal violence. So if we have that, so that's one of our goals, is to increase our diversity, increase the partnerships that we experience. And I'll get into more of that later, but that is one of our goals. Goals 2 and 3 focus on youth knowledge about healthy relationships and helping friends in unhealthy relationships. So we found that there have been some efforts made, like Teen Dating Violence Action Month. There's been some activities about that. And there's also been the Alaska Safe Children's Act that's mandated healthy relationships lessons within the school. But we realized that there's a whole after school population that may not be getting healthy relationship materials, and even in the schools may not be receiving as many lessons as necessary to really help youth feel comfortable to talk to a friend about an unhealthy relationship or to know what warning signs are. So we have goals 2 and 3 were to increase that youth knowledge. Goal 4 was to increase parent caregiver comfort developing relationships with youth, because having a supportive adult is one of the biggest protective factors for a young person. It doesn't have to be their parent, but if it can be, that's a really easy way to support a young person. And it prevents all kinds of things, not just violence in relationships, but also suicidal ideation, use of substances. It also increases their self-esteem and just the way they feel about themselves. And that's really, really important. So that was something that we wanted to highlight as well. Goal 5 was to increase business and community leader knowledge about interpersonal violence. So how do businesses respond when a colleague or an employee or a client may tell you something, or there may be a fight in your business, or there may be, a employee comes up to you and says, I'm dealing with this and I don't feel safe to go home. What do you do? And how do you handle that? That can be really intimidating if you haven't experienced that before or aren't sure what the resources are. And so we want to make sure that we're helping our business and community leaders and supporting them in the work that they're doing, because you play a really important role. And I say you because I'm mostly talking to business leaders right now, but you play an important role in our community, and we want to know how we can help you and want to try and support as much as we can. Because if there's 1 in 2 women and 1 in 4 men are experiencing these types of violence, we know that can be happening in our workplaces, and that we know people can bring that into our businesses when they come in the door. So just being aware of that. And then goal 6 was to increase knowledge of positive masculinity by boys and men. You may have heard the term maybe on social media or just in the media in general of toxic masculinity. It's a really negative word, and it makes it sound like men are the enemy, or men are the perpetrators, or men are not good. And that's not true. Men are absolutely necessary in this work. We can't exclude 50% of our population because they're men. We want men to be involved, and we want to talk about positive masculinity and what does it mean to be a good man, and knowing that we need men if we're ever going to hope to end this epidemic, right? If it's an epidemic, we can't just have 2 agencies like Star and Awake doing all this work. We need to have people from across the community, and we need to have men involved in order to really stop this from happening. And so we want to talk about positive masculinity. What does a good man do, or a positive man do, when his friend is sharing a racist or a sexist joke? Or how do you respond to women in your life? So we're just talking about positive masculinity, and we don't want to talk about toxic masculinity because that's such a negative term. We're just more talking about being good men and talking to young boys specifically about what does it mean to be a good man? What does that look like? So those are the 6 goals that we focused on. And then from there, we developed work groups to try to implement different strategies for each of these different goals. So the youth group, the parent and caregiver work group, and then the business and community leader work group. So I'm going to have a person from each of those groups introduce kind of some of the strategies. So we're going to start with the youth work group, and that would be Samantha McNally from Planned Parenthood. So I'll leave it with you, Sam.
Great, thanks, Summer. All right, hello everyone. My name is Sam McNally. And through AAVP, I've been working a lot with the youth work group, and I just wanted to talk briefly about some of the things that we focus on in this work group that are also in the AAVP prevention plan. And why we know that this work is really important is because people start learning about what is normal and acceptable in their relationships at a really, really young age. So because we know that unhealthy relationships are unfortunately really common in our community, it means that we need to start doing work really early to address that, so we can give young people a chance to talk about their rights and relationships and what's healthy and how to communicate. So there's some strategies here that are in our prevention plan that we have been working on that we hope will start to meet some of those goals. And the first is the Lead On Conference. The Lead On Conference is put on each November, and it brings young people from across the state together to do some leadership training, to learn specifically about healthy relationships, and then to create a project and bring it back to their communities. And so one of AAVP's goals for this year is to bring a small group of Anchorage youth to that conference that will then create a specific violence prevention program that they can implement themselves. We know that youth-driven and led work is really, really powerful, and that young people often listen better to each other than to adults in their lives. So having that youth-led program can be really powerful, and we're excited to keep working on that strategy. We also work with the Girls on the Run program. Before COVID started in March in earnest here in Anchorage, the Girls on the Run program had programming at 16 elementary schools throughout Anchorage and the Valley. And this program incorporates running and exercise into conversations with about healthy relationships, conflict resolution, self-confidence, and communication, things like that. So that's starting at that really early age, which is really exciting. And it's wonderful that they have 16 programs going across our community. They are looking to expand their programming into middle schools, and they are always in need of coaches because they're trying to grow these programs. Another piece that's in our prevention plan is the Safe Dates curriculum and implementing that curriculum throughout our community. This is a 9-session healthy relationships curriculum that has been implemented mostly by educators at Awake at several community organizations and groups in Anchorage, including Covenant House and the Boys and Girls Clubs. Something that we were really excited to get to work on this spring was in working with and involving some practicum students from UAA. So this spring we had a UAA practicum student from the Health Sciences Department who was working with AAVP to do some research and surveys and gathering data on how youth in Anchorage want to be involved in community and volunteer work. How can we meaningfully engage them in this type of work so that they can play an active role in making our community safer, and so that it's a project that they want to be involved in. So we're really excited to be looking more at that data and seeing how we can tap into that as a coalition. And then the last piece that we've been working on is getting active youth participation in AAVP. So getting young people to be on this coalition and to be structuring this work with us. We've been doing some really intentional planning and networking in the community to find out how to do that as effectively as we can. And we've had some presentations in the coalition about that. But we feel like because so many of the strategies in our prevention plan are targeted at youth, it only makes sense to involve youth in the coalition as well. So that's something that we have been working on throughout this year. We know that in the coming year, some of these things may change with COVID-19. Some of these activities may have to alter the way that they work in our communities. We just don't know how yet, but we're excited to keep working on these strategies and to see how they come along in the coming year.
Thanks, Sam. Our next group is the parent and caregiver work group. So I'll have Sarah Fechtel-Cotter talk about that.
Hi, my name is Sarah Fechtel-Cotter. I'm an attorney with Alaska Legal Services and am helping with the parent and caregiver work group. One really exciting program that we have is communication skills for parent presentations. And one of these presentations is actually coming up soon on June 30th. We're going to have a Zoom presentation from 1 until 3. Summer and I will be doing a joint presentation where she'll be covering topics like information on dating violence and how those signs might manifest in a young person, tips for setting up the foundation to talk about those issues, strategies for starting the conversation when you see those red flags, and resources for further support and where to point youth. And I've joined in with this presentation as well because a lot of the work I do is with victims of campus sexual assault or sexual harassment that is prohibited under Title IX that prohibits sex discrimination. And so I'm going to be sharing a little bit of information about what the definition is of sex discrimination in education and how you can advocate for your youth when sex discrimination is happening in schools. And the reason that this is such a great match is that, you know, when you're having these conversations with your young person, they might be more comfortable then to share and disclose some of these, and then having the tools ahead of time of knowing like, oh my gosh, if I get this kind of disclosure, what are my options? Now parents or caregivers will have a better idea. So that is June 30th from 1 to 3. we're partnering with Alaska Center for Resource Families. And this partnership is a new partnership that developed because of the practicum students that we're working with. I was working with a wonderful master's student who made this connection, and we were originally going to do this presentation together before COVID-19 happened and we could no longer do it in person. So now I get the fortune of doing it with Summer, but this is why these practicum students can be really helpful, is they have different connections that we don't have. So we've been working together, and we're also working with practicum students to try to develop other strategies for connecting with parents and caregivers and finding out what resources they really need, not just what we assume is helpful, but what would be most helpful from their perspective. So if any of you are parents and want to chime in and give us your input of like, hey, this is an issue that I really don't know how to handle with my child or a young person in my life that I care about, we're all ears and would love to have you guys participate. And one of the things that we've been talking about also is parent support groups. When I'm working with youth that have experienced any sort of sexual harassment or sexual assault, oftentimes that can be triggering for parents because they have already gone through this process before themselves. And that's the last thing they want, is to know now that their youth is experiencing the same thing and they're re-triggered as well. And there's a variety of different ways that we can structure these parent groups, but one is, you know, helping parents who are re-triggered, as well as helping parents that just need support in having these conversations with their youth in general. And a great program that's already exists is the Teen Speak workshops, and those can be conducted in a variety of ways. I've actually just read the book and kind of gone through the practice exercises that they have in the workbook, but there's also programs that set up where you can do it almost like a book club. So that's what our parent and caregiver work group is doing right now.
Thanks, Sarah. And I'll just jump in here for the business and community leaders work group. There's two opportunities, and I'll go into them a little bit more in depth a little bit, but there's a Make It Your Business training that is focused on helping any kind of business or nonprofit learning more about the dynamics of domestic violence and how to help someone who may come into your company or that may work for you, and how to help them if they're experiencing intimate partner violence in their life. And then the Cut It Out training is a training for specifically for salon stylists, as they tend to sometimes be told things a lot when they're working by their clients who may say something to them about a relationship, or maybe they notice bruising on the scalp or something like that. They are in a unique position. And so there's a training specifically for them that we can offer, and both of these trainings can be offered virtually. I put them in the, there's a link in the chat box that has a link to a folder that has a flyer in there for Cut It Out, as well as our prevention plan and some other things. You can check that out. But those are two trainings, and I'll get into them more in a little bit. And then also working on a messaging campaign to promote healthy relationships. And specifically, this is about all the different awareness months and days that are related to interpersonal violence. So Domestic Violence Action Month, Sexual Assault Action Month, there's, you know, Child Abuse Prevention Month, there's Human Trafficking Awareness Month, the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women's Day, there's Transgender Day of Remembrance. There's a lot of different days and months that are all really important. They're really important months, but sometimes they can kind of run together in our head. Oh, another awareness month. Oh, another Wear a Ribbon Day, right? And it can kind of, and they're all focused on very big issues in our community and issues that can have a negative lens on them. So we wanted to try to work on doing a communication strategy where maybe maybe each of those months is an opportunity to focus on healthy relationships with your child, or maybe it's focus on healthy relationships inside your marriage, or within your dating relationship, or within how you handle yourself on campus. I mean, just different ways to look at what does a healthy relationship look like in this context, or how do we do that? So we're working on that, and that's something that we'd really like to see implemented in our community, to try to join up some of these efforts and have like a positive spin to all these different awareness months and days. So that's some of the work that's being done in the business and community leaders. And as mentioned, we would love to have your feedback, because a lot of us, like I mentioned, we're in the nonprofit world. So we aren't in the business world. We don't know exactly what you need. So if there are things that we could do to better support you, we would absolutely love your feedback or love your participation in our coalition to inform the work that we're trying to do. So that's just a little brief overview of that. And then I also wanted to let you know about the National Leadership Academy for the Public's Health, which is a leadership academy. It's a 9-month leadership academy for community groups. And it's a national Leadership Academy, and AAVP was accepted into this academy. We're one of 10 groups across the nation, so it's a very big honor for us. And the idea is, again, to gain leadership skills and work across sectors and silos to work on a public health issue. Well, domestic violence and interpersonal violence and prevention of those types of violence, it's a public health issue. And so what our specific project is we're going to be working to expand our AAVP membership, which ties into our prevention goal number 1, which was to expand our coalition and make it look more like our Anchorage community. So again, that includes increasing our diversity and our partnerships, and making sure that all the voices are at the table. And on that note, that leads us right into saying that we do value diversity and we really want to include more people into our team. And like I've mentioned, we do have some underrepresented groups. We do have an occasional man join every once in a while, but we would really like to have more people at the table that represent our whole community. Right now, we have a lot of nonprofit work. We have a lot of white women that are involved in it, and that's great, and we value everyone who's there. But we would also love to have more underrepresented groups. We would love to have men show up to the table. We'd love to have people from the business community show up to the table. We really need everyone. Like, as I mentioned before, if this is an epidemic, then we need more resources, not less, right? So like if we look at the response to COVID-19, we're taking a lot of resources and a lot of people and a lot of voices to come together to try to stop this epidemic. And the same thing is true for stopping the epidemic of interpersonal violence. We really need to have all the voices at the table if we're going to effectively do this. And again, meeting people so it's relevant. Like Sam mentioned, we want to, if we're going to involve youth and we're going to talk about having 2 of our 6 goals work toward involving youth, then we want to make sure that we have youth at the table to give their input of what's needed. And I should also mention, I forgot to mention this, but the 6th goal, engaging men, was added in the last year. So I forgot to add that we don't have a specific work group for men, for engaging men, but we do have a youth group for young men, ages 12 to 18, talking about positive masculinity. And we do have positive masculinity training for agencies and organizations, specifically for those who may be more male dominated, who may want to talk more about what does it mean to be a positive man in today's society. So I just thought I'd mention that as well. And so how we, feel free, if you're interested in being a part of our community, of being part of this coalition, we would love for you to join us. Our next meeting will be on June 3rd, which is this coming Wednesday. It's normally the first Wednesday of every month, unless there's a holiday, then it kind of moves back maybe a week or so. But it's from noon to 1:30 and it will be on Zoom. So you're welcome to join us. If you are interested, I'll have our contact information at the end of this PowerPoint presentation. You can contact us to get on the email list, if that's something that you're interested in. And then, again, so next steps for business, I was going to talk more about this. So there's the Make It Your Business training, which is again for any business, nonprofit, anybody who wants to know more about how they can help people that may come through their doors or may be employed by them. And this covers the dynamics of domestic violence, warning signs. It focuses mostly on how to recognize, respond, and refer. So it's not going to turn you into this domestic violence advocate who's going to constantly be looking out for everything. It's more just what are the practical steps that you can take in your business today or tomorrow, and how to help people in those situations, and then give you some community resources that you can refer to so that you don't have to lean on all of your own knowledge. You can lean on your community partners who can help that person or provide some assistance. And then the Cut It Out training is again for salon stylists. And again, similar things, focusing on how to recognize, respond, and refer. And again, the reason it's specific for salon stylists is because sometimes they have a little bit more of an intimate relationship with the person who's getting their hair cut and may have some different things that come up that they may want to respond to, and just gives some more training about how to respond in a good way and what that can look like. And both of these trainings can be adapted for specific agencies. So for example, Make It Your Business, it could be for your employees about how to respond if a client comes in, or to respond to a colleague. It could also be for management to talk about what kind of policies do we want to put in place to support our employees. So if an employee comes to HR and says, I am having this issue at home, I don't feel safe, or I'm having a hard time, I need to take more time off from work because I have I have to file for a protection order or something like that. What do you do when that happens? And so it can be adapted to meet the needs that you have, or if you have scenarios that you really want us to cover, we can do that. So there's certain ways that you've seen things happen, and you're like, I don't know what to do in that situation. What can we do about that? We can put that into the presentation so that we can talk more about those issues that may come up that are specific for your business. It's not a one size fits all. We just do this. We want to adapt it and make it relevant for you and your company and for the work that you're doing. And then I will pass the mic real quick to Lisa Deemer from Rasmussen Foundation to talk more about our community response to COVID-19 and how that has affected some of our work and some of the benefits available to our community.
Thank you, and I appreciate this opportunity to speak about it. So AK Can Do, I hope you've heard about it. It is the statewide COVID-19 Relief Fund. It was started early in the pandemic by United Way of Anchorage and the Alaska Community Foundation, as well as Rasmussen Foundation. And just quick side note, Rasmussen is a chamber member, and we directly support the work the chamber is doing on diversity, equity, and inclusion. So we're glad to be part of that. The AK Can Do COVID Relief Fund is unique and significant in that it provides support both to individuals in need as well as to the agencies on the front lines providing critical services at this time. Some of the agencies that have gotten support through the fund include food banks, childcare agencies helping to get childcare restarted, as well as 5 domestic violence shelters and safe houses around the state in Haines and Bethel and other places. So the funds are going directly to the biggest needs. As far as the individual help, individuals can get that help simply by calling 211. And so far, more than 1,100 individuals have gotten help through the fund. And it's basics, it's food, it's shelter, it's help with utilities. And they are kind of surprised at how easy the process is. So just know that the resources that is there for those who need help. It's also an opportunity for everyone to have a place to donate and to know that your donations are going directly to our communities. The administrative fees are being covered by funders, so everything that people donate goes directly to provide help. And if you do donate, you can say, give where the greatest need is. You can say, I want to give to an individual, or you want to give to critical services on the front line. So you've really got that opportunity there to pick. You could even pick a geographic area. And being the Anchorage Chamber, you could just say Anchorage, or you could just say greatest need. So far, more than $2.4 million has been raised, and more than 1,000 individuals, like I said, more than 1,000 individuals have received help. Also, more than 1,000 individuals have made donations. So all of that's really big, and businesses as well, and very grateful for those. I just wanted to call out some of the businesses that are chamber members that have given to the AK Can Do Fund. ConocoPhillips, Wells Fargo, Primera Blue Cross Blue Shield, Alaska Airlines, 3M, Alaska, Alaska USA Federal Credit Union, Northrim Bank, Key Bank, KPMG, and we've had some others who are providing in-kind support, including the marketing company Spawn, which helped design the AK Can Do campaign, and GCI has given airtime. And some other businesses also have been supportive are Exxon Mobil, Sea Alaska, Alaska National Insurance Company, Saltchuk, Doyon Limited, CVS, Afognak, and Perkins Coie. So getting a lot of good support from around the state and beyond. And it's as simple as akcando.org to find out more about everything. And if you have given as a business and I didn't call your name, please put it in the chat box. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, Lisa. So with that, this is just the contact information for us. So there's our website and our Facebook and our email. So if you would like to get on our email list, you can feel free to email me or Facebook, or go on the website and register for our next meeting, which is on Wednesday again, June 3rd, from 12 to 1:30. If you have other questions, feel free to reach out through those same channels. And I'm happy to answer any questions that may have come up in the chat box.
Summer, we have a question about just sharing the slides. Is it okay? I wouldn't mind emailing them out to the attendees if that's okay with you.
Yeah, that's perfect. Yep, I can send that out.
Great.
Yep.
And if anyone would prefer to talk, I think you can raise your hand, or if you want to ask a question. Otherwise, you can type them in the Q&A box. So if we don't have any further questions, I'll go ahead and pass it back to Bruce.
Okay, well, thank you. And thank you so much for that great presentation. It's certainly extremely critical, for us to maintain a safe society here in Anchorage. I just really applaud the work that all of you ladies have done, in this area, and all the people you work with as well. So thank you so much. So I think just to wrap up, if there are not any more questions, and even while I'm talking, closing out, if someone has a question, just type it in and Tasha will read it off. But as far as future announcements, this Wednesday, please join us for a virtual Chamber Academy where local nonprofit organizations, including Campfire Alaska, Covenant House, Food Bank of Alaska, Salvation Army, and United Way of Anchorage will discuss resources available in the community, opportunities for support, and information for business and community leaders. And you know how important that is, especially through the pandemic, through other emergencies that we've had. These organizations get called on to meet a number of needs. So that's going to be a very meaningful presentation as well. And next Monday, June 8th, Arctic IT will give a presentation on technology for business continuity, followed by a presentation the following Monday from Providence, which will be June 15th, on maintaining hospital safety in the wake of COVID-19. So for all of these events, please go to anchoragechamber.org and register. And so with that, that is all that we have for today. Again, thank you so much for your participation and joining us. You folks have a wonderful week. Thanks again.